I'm carrying on here at Midway in Pacific War by Victory Games. Before I do, I've been asked some questions by a couple of people about play of this, and specifically about sort of fog of war and solo ability. And so I'll try and answer that as best I can. So in these battle scenarios, the fog of war is essentially provided by the fact that the force and task force markers give you no indication of what's there, and you therefore have to use searches to find things. You have to have detected things in order to launch attacks against them, and then the fact that these charts conceal what the markers are representing, and although they don't technically, if you're playing solo, you can keep a fairly simple record, like I'm doing with these coloured cubes, of what sort of detection you have on each task force and so on, and therefore what you know, and you can make reasonable solitaire decisions for either player based on that. And if you were playing face to face, there's enough cardboard in this box to be able to conceal your forces behind, for example, this kind of huge screen thing here. You would fold it up and use that to conceal your task forces. So you can, if you need to, stick them behind huge walls of cardboard so that no one can glance across and see, wow, clearly Task Force 1 is the one with the huge stack of counters in it, and Task Force 2 has only got one counter in it, and so on. So that is the primary fog of war in the battle scenarios. Obviously, both sides know their initial dispositions and the initial dispositions of the opposing forces, and both sides critically know what the operational intelligence condition is, and so they know what they're dealing with. And then, for example, here in Midway, the special scenario rules force the Japanese to play as if they don't know what the operational condition is, because it forces them to sail to within launch range or strike range of Midway. As an aside, I then started thinking, hold on, strike range from Midway, given that Japanese CV aircraft have a range of 8, could be 8 hexes. Have I played this all wrong by advancing their primary fleet to 4 hexes of Midway, when actually they could have stopped at 8? And I thought, well, what would the effect of that have been? It would have meant that the Americans could only search out from Midway and only ever get a red result on the table, which would never have been enough to differentiate between a light carrier and battleships and the carrier group. So they could never have identified the carrier group, and then what were they supposed to do? The only thing they'd have had available would be to sail their fleet up right close and try and get a search quicker than the Japanese got a search from their carrier-based planes. And given that the Japanese search is slightly better than the American, the chances of that happening would have been, well, poor. And then you'd have had a sort of floundering American fleet stuck in the middle of the Pacific, up over here somewhere, facing an enormous Japanese fleet that it hadn't managed to identify, which didn't seem like a recipe for Midway particularly. So I have assumed that strike range in the rules, where it says the Japanese must move to within strike range, that means an operational strike range at which they can strike and recover their aircraft, rather than maximum range at which all their aircraft then crash into the sea. So that was just a decision that I made, but it did give me the heebie-jeebies for a bit, where I thought, hold on, Yeah, it just says the Japanese naval movement during the operational contact phase cannot cease until the Japanese task force containing the CVs is within airstrike range of Midway. Technically, that's 8 hexes, and I think if you played it at 8 hexes, the scenario becomes close to unwinnable for the Americans, because 8 hexes is a range at which, as I say, they can't identify the enemy carrier force, and then there's no way that between 3 forces that all look like the carrier force, their single individual force will be, they're just not going to find it quicker than they're found themselves. And I think that means they'll end up wasting their ambush and not get the results from that. And at that point, I think they're screwed, given the disparities in the fleets. Right, back to the fog of war then. If you move into the campaign games, a lot more things click in that are going to be challenging to solo. So the Americans and Japanese have these tables, and they roll in secret depending on the month, and that gives them a secret sort of in operational intelligence level, from 1 to 3 for the Japanese and from 1 to 4 for the Americans. The tables are very asymmetric indeed. Then players are going to all roll on another chart or use another calculation. I can't show you the Japanese one, but it's more of a calculation. But the Americans are going to roll on their own table to determine how many command points they get. And meanwhile, the Japanese are going to do some calculation based on all kinds of merchant shipping and all kinds of other stuff as to how many command points that they get. And then, so here's the American command point table over here. So you're going to be rolling on a month table, and you're going to be rolling in secret and getting secret numbers of command points. And then both sides are going to be bidding. In other words, they're going to be announcing a number of command points that they intend to spend on an operation, and the higher one, I think, gets to do their operation, and then they have that many command points to spend to activate their units and conduct this kind of operation. So each of these units has a command point cost, and there are command point costs for HQ, and you have to do all kinds of supply determinations, blah blah blah. It all gets quite involved, but the point is that in secret, you're calculating your operational intelligence level, your command point level, and then making bids as to what operation you're willing to conduct. And at the same time, in secret, the losing player, the reaction player, is rolling on this table, taking their strategic intelligence level and rolling a secret dice against it, and coming up with this chit, either surprise attack, intercept, or I assume that is ambush, but there's an A asterisk here, and at no point anywhere can I find the difference between the A and the A star and the A. There is, of course, our ambush and carrier ambush is a strictly superior version of ambush. So my assumption is that the A's are ambush and the A star is carrier ambush, because if all the A's allow you to select carrier ambush, you would never pick ambush, because carrier ambush is all the things that ambush has, plus the ability to do the double attack and the double hits and the low cap and the flak after the attack thing on carriers. Never, at no point given an A would you ever select ambush if you could pick carrier ambush, because it's strictly better to have the carrier ambush under all circumstances. It has no downsides, only upsides. So I don't understand, and I can't find what this asterisk means. It's simply not discussed in the rules anywhere. It's not discussed on this table. The table just says the rules are so sketchy on this point. It's a little troubling. Anyway, the point is that in secret, the reactive player will roll a dice and keep it under a cup somewhere next to this this thing and take a token and put it down there on the op intel side, so that the active operation player doesn't know whether they're launching a surprise attack or walking into a trap or simply being intercepted. And only after they've done their operation contact movement does the reactive player flip this over and show them what's happening. So there's a lot of secret information that comes in at the point where you move into the campaign game. It's manageable, and more than manageable, it's extremely good fun in the battle scenarios. In the campaign scenarios, I can imagine myself struggling to solo this, or at least having to try and work through a rationalization very clearly for what each player is doing. I don't think I could play it by instinct solo, because you'd always then be trying to second guess what your own decisions are, and I personally can't solo games like that. I need to have a reasoned argument for why a particular player is doing a thing, and if I can't come up with that reasoned argument, then I don't do it. So in this instance, I can, as I did before, use this layout of our search results to identify what the where the enemy carrier group is, and then using that I can try and sneak my carrier group up on them. Great. But if you know, we were in a bidding war to even begin the operations, I think I would have to have a serious think about whether I could even engage in that kind of process in a feasible way without it simply degenerating into a case of seeing what happens if I do this for this player and this for this player. I don't think I could play well for each side. I think I could just see a kind of what happens if. And I don't think that would be particularly satisfying, but we'll see. We'll see. What else have I got to say? Oh yeah, there are other optional rules that you can bring in campaign and strategic games, such as dummy fleets. So you can add to the fog of war also by, you know, doubling up. You're adding loads of dummy fleet markers in your ports. I think you can do one for each fleet that's already there or something. I haven't really read the rules on it, but you can certainly create dummy fleets and be sailing, you know, dozens of these things around. Again, once you come into a situation where you're playing solo and you're sailing dummy fleets around, I think that would start to become tricky as the reactive player, to make good judgments in a solitaire game as to what the reactive player is going to search for or not search for, without using your own understanding of the operational plans that have been created. I think that would be quite challenging. I'm not saying people can't do it and haven't done it and can't have a great deal of fun doing it, but I think I struggle with that level of forgetting what the other side is doing. I certainly don't use any kind of forgetting what the other side is doing when I'm playing the battle scenarios. So there's a quick discussion, actually a 15-minute discussion on solitaire approaches to Pacific War and the various scales of it, and some griping about the paucity of the rules in the campaign game, which I hope is fixed or filled in a little bit more in the GMT version. Right, I've moved into the advantage movement phase. I've got to move. I was going to go away and think about what the Americans have done, were going to do, and I haven't done that at all. I've just waffled on about solitaire. So now I need to do that and get on with this. Here we are at Midway then, and the sort of carrier battle is about kicking off. The Americans have moved forward in their movement phase and have sent aircraft in to strike the carriers here. The Japanese made the detection roll, so they are aware and alerted and have therefore got their planes off their carriers and are able to fly some cap against the Americans. So they've designated their best fighter unit here. They don't get any support, but they do get to fly cap with one of their units. So these guys here are flying cap. The Americans have got to decide which one of these is going to act as escort. We'll choose this one here. So we have got this rather nasty 7 with 1 step loss, so air-to-air of 6, and the US plane has got an air-to-air of 5. Let's give them both a roll. Actually, the first thing we'll do is we'll roll to see if the American attack is coordinated. They've got 2 level 1s and a level 2, so they need a 3 or less on their dice to coordinate the attack, and they get a 4. Unlucky, so this is uncoordinated going in, and we've got the combat charts around somewhere. Let's give it a dice roll then and see how we do. I'm madly zoomed in for some reason. No idea why. Okay, let's have a go then. So the Americans have got a 3, Japanese have got a 4. That's a hit. Both sides have done well there. So what did I say the strengths were? The Japanese with a 6 rolled a 4, and that will be cap versus uncoordinated. That will be 1 loss. And the Americans with a 5 rolled a 3, and that is uncoordinated strike versus cap. That's 1 loss. Okay, so both units take a loss here from the air-to-air combat. And now we are into the serious business of the naval strikes versus the Japanese carriers. So let's pull the carriers over and just take a look at what we've got to aim at. Okay, so these are the Japanese carriers. We've got the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu and the Hiryu. You can see their capacity 5, 5, 4 and 4, and they've all got 5 hull, crippled when they got 1 less, so crippled on 4 hits. So this is this sort of super surprise phase that you get if you're on ambush CV, and that means that your hits are doubled. And our attack strengths for our planes going in are 8 minus any step loss is 7. So a 7 there. This guy's got 5 and this guy's now down to 4. So the best chance of sinking something would be obviously to pile all 3 of our flights against 1 carrier, but that also gives us the best chance of wasting loads and loads of hits if we roll really well. And obviously the best chance of scoring the most hits is to allocate 1 plane to 3 individual carriers, and then you've got a sort of middle ground of 2 against 1 and 1 against another. I think we have to take a chance here and allocate a plane to each of the Japanese carriers, because we want to. The other thing we want to do is minimise their launch capacity to launch strikes back at us. So I think we are going to fly this flight here, this flight here, and this final flight here. Whether that's a good idea, I don't know, but that's what we're going to do. After we've done this, we'll take flak. The Japanese have got sufficient screen, 2 destroyers and 2 heavy cruisers to have 8 points of flak coming at us. But let's do these attacks. So we've got an attack strength of 7 on the Akagi here. Let's see how we fare. We've got a 3. That is going to be lots of damage, I think. Let's come over onto the damage table over here. So our attack of 7, rolling a 3, puts us on this blue column, coming down here, and we are what? 1 engineer versus naval. That's going to be 2 hits, doubled to 4. So that's going to cripple the Akagi. I'll just grab a 4 marker if I can find one. I thought I had some damage markers punched out and clipped and stuff, but maybe I didn't. I'll tell you what, let's just put the white 4 dice up there to remind me. And then we've got 5 factors going in against the Kaga. Let's see how this goes. That's a 1, that's a super result. So 5 factors with a 1. That's going to be on the blue column coming down here. Down here, that's 2, doubled to 4 hits. And I'll just slide the white dice across to show they've both taken 4 hits then. And then finally we have got 4 factors against the Soryu, and they get a 4, which is going to be 1 hit doubled to 2. That is as good as it probably could have got, barring critical hits and sinkings, but that everything hitting is as a phenomenal result for the Americans there. They can be well pleased with their day's work. Let me just sort the damage counters out, and then we'll come back and do some flak against them. Okay, I've sorted out the damage counters for the Japanese carriers. They now only have launch capacity of 8, and they've got 20 steps of aircraft, so they've just lost 12 steps of aircraft, which don't have anywhere to land. That's very, very bad news for them. So yeah, the Battle of Midway going not exactly as it did, but you know, pretty similar in terms of outcome. Let's give the Japanese a quick roll on flak. They've got a 4. That will do a hit to an American plane. They will lose a step of this one that's taken some damage already, and put that up to 3 steps of damage. I'll sort that out, and then I'm going to have to sort out all the damage on these planes, and I'm going to have to check the rules on what crippling does as well, because I haven't had a crippled ship, I don't think, so far. Maybe I have, but I didn't check what it did. So it's quite important now though, so let's see. So I'm still carrying on with the fallout here in Pacific War from this American strike against the Japanese carrier fleet. And if you remember, we had 2 Japanese carriers, the Akagi and the Kaga, which both took 4 hits and were therefore 1 below their total and crippled. And I was looking up what crippled meant. It has a number of effects. Interesting effects. They can't fly aircraft, so I've removed the aircraft from them because it's pointless. They no longer have aircraft that can fly from them, so that's another 2 steps of aircraft. So the Japanese have gone from 20 steps of very, very potent aircraft to 6, so that's bad. They can only move 1 in the movement phase, rather than ships other than submarines can move 1 or 2, but they can only move 1 now. They aren't allowed to withdraw in naval combat unless they're screened by other uncrippled ships with gunnery factors, which they are, so that won't come up. However, something that's really interesting is that when a ship is crippled, if the enemy has submarines in the vicinity, and that means within 10 hexes, then you get an automatic roll with your submarines per 12 steps of submarines to just outright sink the crippled ships. Yeah, that's a sort of abstraction of the ability to pull in subs from in the area and hunt the crippled ships down. So the Americans actually, I was trying to figure out what a step of submarines was, because they've got 6 hits on them. Here's an American submarine. They've got 6 hits on them, but clearly an individual submarine can't take 6 hits. So I looked up in the rules, and that's actually 6 boats each with 1 hit. And then reading through some more rules, it's clear that this is meant to also indicate 6 steps of submarines. And what that means is that the Americans have 18 steps of submarines in the vicinity of the battle. So the submarines are in here, and the Japanese are over here. This is where the strike took place. And so for every 12 steps of submarines, they get a dice roll on each of the cripples just to outright sink it. So with 18 steps, that's just a 1 in 10 chance. So that's 0s required. But I'm going to roll these now just to see if the subs can finish off the job that the Navy has done. So on a 0, the Akagi will sink, and they get a 6. And on a 0, the Kaga will sink, and they get an 8. And so no, they haven't managed to, and that's a one-off die roll, and no, they haven't managed to sink the Akagi or Kaga like that. And we now go into the Japanese segment, I think, where they have got some serious thinking to do about how they're going to respond to the very effective surprise attack stroke ambush from the Americans. So I'll come back with some thinking, but I know roughly what it's going to be, in that they're going to charge battleships towards the carriers to try and drive them away, while still attempting to push on towards Midway. So they've just got to figure out what that's going to look like. So yeah, here we go. Still at Midway then. I've done the Japanese moves here in day 9. So the Japanese carrier fleet has shifted out over here, and that now means it's a range where it can hit the American fleet, but the Americans can't respond with a simultaneous strike because they're out of range. And the Japanese are now flying what aircraft they've got left in to face the Americans, and the Americans have failed a detection roll to detect the incoming flights. There's 7 does not detect the incoming Japanese, so that's not a good start for them. That means they can't get cap up. It means that they can lose planes as part of the strike, and it means that they get their flak after the strike has hit. So here goes. We've got 2 groups of planes coming in. I ought to make a coordination roll, but it only matters for cap, really, so coordination doesn't change your strike combat, and given that we haven't got cap, it doesn't really make any difference. So we've got a unit here, 2 steps on it, so it's got a naval strength of 8 minus 2 is 6, and this one's an 8 minus 4 is 4. So a 6 and a 4, these are not doubled. The Japanese don't get that advantage. So here we are on day 9 at Midway, and the Japanese have to decide how to split these up, or whether to split them up. And I think they're not going to. I think they're going to have both against the Enterprise. They've got the Yorktown Hornet and Enterprise to aim for. They're going for the Enterprise, and they'll see what they can do. So they've got 2 attack rolls here. The first one is the 6. They get a 2. That's a decent result for them. So That is going to be on the 6th column here. A 2 is on the blue chart, coming down here, down here, down here. That is going to be 2 hits on the Enterprise, and then the 4 strength gets a 2 as well. That's another good result. 4 strength on the 2, that's on the yellow column down here. That's 1 hit. So they've put 3 hits on the Enterprise. Not going to cripple it, not going to sink it, but it is also going to reduce, it's also going to put 3 step losses on the American planes on the Enterprise, and that's going to be annoying for them. And now they're going to get to do some flak. I'll figure all this out, add some damage tokens, and having done that, with the Japanese also moving over here in the Aleutians just to defend their landings, that will see us through to the day adjustment. So we will move that on to day 11, and that will pretty much wrap it up here. I've just got to add the hits to the Enterprise and roll out some flak, and that will be it. So I will move on to a new battle sequence in the next video.